welcome. Will you please remain standing through the prayer and the hymn? Let us pray. Come now, eternal God, awaken in us gratitude for the years so quickly gone, and strengthen us for the journey of the years before us, years full of promise and uncertainty. Give us, we ask, horizons that call us beyond the easy paths. Give us honesty to question the popular detours. And may we reach our destinations without despising our roots, so that our successes may be homecomings. Along the way, be for us that dancing grace, that self-giving spirit, that daring discernment by which we see and care for what happens to the human race. Make us sensible to the ache and anxiety in the world, and deliver us from deafness to cries for help. And grant that we may continue to learn from each other how to journey in the world as those who love it well and serve it wisely. Amen. Will you join in the first hymn after the organ's introduction?
Good morning. Here. I want to welcome all our guests and visitors here to Drew University's 122nd annual commencement. And today, we are especially proud to welcome you to Meade Hall. You all know what a wonderful history this building has. This is a glorious hall of scholarship and of tradition. And now after 8 months, only 8 months after one of the worst fires in any university's history, Meade is radiant once again. And what I really would like to do is ask us all to give a round of applause to Scott McDonald and to all of those who worked to get Meade Hall ready so we could have the ceremony here today. And speaking of putting out fires, I want to recognize some very special people who are with us today. Now, I know they're not dressed as firemen, but they responded to calls that were just as serious. They may not drive checkered cars or have tinted windows, but they've logged thousands of miles as chauffeurs and cabbies. And they may not wear a white coat, but they've been doctors, dentists, and psychologists in times of crisis. They seldom work banker's hours. They work much longer than that, but they've handed out more loans and grants than even the healthiest S&L. They are, of course, your parents. And on a day at which we honor volunteers and volunteerism of Drew, of course, there are no greatest volunteers anywhere than those parents we just spoke of. You know, it was only a month ago that I took my oath of office as president of Drew University. That was my day, and I loved it. But today is your day. This is the day of the class of 1990. Today is a time to rejoice and be proud, because what you have accomplished is tremendous. You are some of the nation's brightest, most gifted, and frankly, some of the nicest people that I know, and you've turned that potential into real achievement. And I want to say just a very personal word here. I came a couple of months ago, and the class of 1990 showed me where the buildings were, pointed out what they thought was wrong. After they saw me drive, helped to present me a bicycle. And all together, couldn't have welcomed me in a warmer or nicer way. And I just really want to say, you, the class of 90, is a class that I'll never forget, and I want to thank you very much for everything you did for me, personally. Today, really, we send you out with only one message, and it's really a very simple one, and it's a message that's carried really through the history of this country. And that is this: consider at some time giving some of your time to public service. Be a volunteer. President Bush called the Volunteers of America 1,000 points of light, and also said that every definition of a successful life must include, at one time or another, serving others. That phrases may be new, but that sentiment is so deeply embedded in the heritage of our country. The French historian Alexis de Tocqueville knew that America was very special more than a century and a half ago, when he wrote, "I have often admired the extreme skill with which the inhabitants of the United States succeed in proposing a common object for the exertions of a great many men and women, and introducing them voluntarily to pursue it." And what de Tocqueville said in 1835 is as true today. Our common object may be as timely as caring for an AIDS patient, or as timeless as feeding the hungry. It is my hope that this wonderful class, and indeed your generation of Americans, will keep that spirit of volunteerism alive. So without further ado, what I'd like to do is introduce our commencement speaker. He is one of the few people in America to distinguish themselves in all three areas: in business, in government, and in the volunteer world. He was chairman and chief executive officer of American Motors during that company's most successful years. He helped citizens in Michigan to reform their state's constitution, and he served 3 distinguished terms as one of the most popular and successful governors in Michigan's history. Later, he became Secretary of Housing and Urban Development. But all those accomplishments are not the reason that we honor this man today. We honor him today for his 3rd career. Throughout George Romney's life, he was always an active civic leader. His volunteering goes all the way back to the Second World War, when he led an automotive industry group in supporting the war effort. But now he has put together all his experience and know-how for 16 years when he became founding chairman of Volunteer, the National Center. This organization was the national trailblazer and the largest volunteer organization in the entire country now. And that organization has become successful in a large part because of his stewardship. There are people today, as we sit here, helping people in cities and towns all over this nation because of the efforts of this one man. You'll be hearing more about him later, but now I would like you to join me in giving a very warm welcome to George Romney at Drury University.
I hope you know how fortunate you are to have Governor McCain as your president here at the university. I think you'll realize that more in the years to come as you have the benefit of his leadership, because there's nothing more important in any activity than leadership, and you've got a great leader in our country. Now, the most inspired American said that when we talk, we should talk the words of life. Back in 1965, when we were in the Vietnam conflict, and many young men were going to Canada or Sweden or some other place to escape the draft, I was the commencement speaker at Bethany College. And I told the graduates that I thought every young man between the ages of 18 and 35 should give at least 2 years of his life in military or some form of voluntary service. And when I got back to Lansing the next day, the Lansing State Journal reported that Governor Romney had said that every young man between the ages of 18 and 35 should give at least 2 years of his life in some form of military or voluntary service. And I got a letter from a friend of mine the next day, and he said, "Dear Governor, can't I substitute my mother-in-law?" Now, there wasn't much wrong with that report, just one little letter, but it made a big difference. And I found throughout life that little differences make a big difference. And probably the things that make the biggest differences are the ideas that we have. As we all know, the most powerful thing in the world is an idea whose time has come. And it was ideas that made this country the greatest nation the world has ever seen. And there were 3 basic ones. Number 1, the founders departed from the conventional pattern of vesting ultimate power in the government. They vested ultimate power in the people, we the people. And then the second thing was the fact that the governor's already referred to, namely that as people face problems too big in this country in the last century and into this century, they did not turn first to government. They turned first to their fellow citizens, and they said, what can we do about it? And so they organized some cooperative effort of dealing with the problem. And then the third idea was free competitive enterprise. And I put the competitive in because there are only two ways to discipline an economy. One's absolute authority and the other's competition. So you can have a free economy. These three things made us the most prosperous nation the world has ever seen. Now, Walt Whitman in his Leaves of Grass says that every fruition of success, no matter what, is followed by something to make necessary a still greater struggle. The magnitude of our economic success confronts us with unprecedented social problems. And these social problems are, in my opinion, the most critical challenge that we face. In my lifetime, I've seen some very substantial changes in this country. I've seen it move from a rural and agricultural society to an urban and industrial society, and now we're moving into a knowledge society. I've seen the attitude of the American people change. In my lifetime, most Americans have stopped saying, "What can we do about it?" and have begun to say, "What's the government going to do about it?" And if you want to get to the heart of that fiscal problem they're battling down in Washington, it's just that. What's the government going to do about it? And the third is that the character of the problems has changed. The problems now that threaten us most are social problems. And let me just quickly list a few of them. I think the most fundamental one is the decline in conviction on the part of many Americans that we're endowed by our Creator with unalienable rights. Jefferson in the Jefferson Memorial is quoted as saying, "The God who gave us life gave us liberty. Can any nation's liberties be secure if it removes the conviction that its liberties are the gift of God?" We had a pitched battle when we had the Constitutional Convention in Michigan to retain in our state constitution something written by the founders of the nation. As a matter of fact, before they wrote the Constitution, they said education consisted of religion, morality, knowledge, and that these are fundamental to human well-being and good government, and therefore education should be encouraged. Now, I'd list second, deterioration of the family and teenage pregnancy, single parenthood families, drugs, crime, extreme pockets of poverty, a growing underclass in many of our metropolitan centers, and then homelessness and hunger and illiteracy and dependency and public education that in too many instances doesn't educate, the environment, and there are other social problems. And these social problems in combination, in my opinion, threaten the future of this nation more than the economic failure of communism threatens Russia. And we only have two methods of dealing with these problems effectively. They can't be dealt with effectively by government or money, just by government or money, because of their very nature. These problems are behavioral and local. They're not concentrated in Washington. They're not concentrated in Trenton. They're in our own homes, in our own neighborhoods, in our own communities. And that's where they have to be dealt with. And they have to be dealt with by people helping people. That's the only way they can be solved effectively. And there are two methods of people helping people. One is the one-to-one relationship, and the other is voluntary cooperation. Examples. When I first became governor of Michigan, there was a young sociologist professor at Michigan State University who had college students going into the schools in the poorer districts of Pontiac helping youngsters with problems of one type or another. As he described this program to me, he said, sooner or later the child who's being helped with a reading problem says to the college student, "Are you being paid to do this?" And he said, when the college student can honestly say, "No, I'm not being paid to do this. I'm doing this because I want to help you," he said that motivates the child in a way that ordinarily the paid person can't do. Week before last, I was with the chairman of the board of Dow Chemical Company. I didn't relate this experience of mine to him, but he related one of his to me. He said he was talking to a remedial reading teacher recently, and he said to her, "What are you doing to help the youngsters who are having reading difficulties?" Well, she says, "We're using computers to help them." Well, he said, "Is that the best way?" "Oh, no," she said. "If we could get people to work with them, that would be much better. And the younger the people are, the better it is and more effective it is." And this is the secret of Alcoholics Anonymous and Drugs Anonymous and the mentoring program that Ray Chambers is inaugurating on a broad basis. And there's no substitute for this willingness of an individual who's capable of helping another individual to help that individual to help him or herself. Cooperation. I've spent most of my life industrially in the auto industry. As an industry, we spent more money supporting government traffic safety programs than any other single thing we spent money on as an industry. Along comes a woman by the name of Candy Leitner 8 years ago. She has a twin daughter killed by a drunk driver. She says, "I'm going to do something about that." She organizes Mothers Against Drunk Driving, and that's done more to reduce traffic fatalities than any single thing that's happened in my lifetime. Eunice Schreiber, the sister of President Jack Kennedy, and Sarge Schreiber, her husband, said, "We're going to do something for the handicapped." They organized Special Olympics. That's now the biggest athletic event in the world. Over 800 countries. Russia's just adopted it as a national program. Peter Uberoff, who ran the last regular Olympics in this country, wasn't going to be given any government assistance. So he enlisted 70,000 volunteers that he didn't have to pay and made them profitable for the first time in history. And he goes across the country saying, when the private sector mobilizes people as volunteers, almost anything can be accomplished. And that's true. It's the most effective and least costly way of solving problems. And we must resolve our social problems if this country is to remain competitive globally and if we are to remain prosperous. A friend of mine shared an experience with me that he had with Mother Teresa. He says, almost 15 years ago, when I was a theology student in Israel, I had the pleasure, and I might add the humbling experience of meeting Mother Teresa while she was working in a refugee camp on the Gaza Strip. He said, when I commented on the tremendous work she was doing for the poorest of the poor in the third world countries, she came close to give me a scolding and said that there was an equal amount of service needed